Pirates weren't just thieves, they were accidental masters of physics that wouldn't be formally discovered for another century. While you think sails only work with wind behind them, these outlaws cracked a maritime secret that turned the ocean into their personal highway, regardless of wind direction. Pirates had a problem that would make any modern sailor break out in a cold sweat. No engines, no motors, not even a tiny backup generator tucked away somewhere below deck. When the wind decided to throw a tantrum, pirates were completely at its mercy, and the wind could be one moody beast. The ocean doesn't care about your plans. Wind blows from wherever it feels like blowing, and pirates had to deal with it whether they liked it or not. Sometimes gentle breezes pushed ships along like a helpful friend giving you a nudge. Other times, howling gales turned sailing into a life-or-death wrestling match between human skill and nature's raw power. Strong winds brought serious trouble. Ships could get pushed sideways, spun around, or worse, completely lose control. The bigger the wind, the harder it became to steer these massive wooden vessels through churning waves. Pirates weren't just fighting other ships or dodging naval patrols. They were constantly battling invisible forces that could snap their masts like toothpicks or send them careening into rocks. Sails and rigging demanded respect and careful handling. These weren't just pieces of cloth hanging from poles. They were complex systems that could make or break a voyage. Too much wind in the wrong sail at the wrong time? That's how you lose a mast. Too little attention to the rigging during a storm? That's how crews ended up swimming with the sharks instead of sailing above them. But here's where pirates really earned their reputation for toughness. Every crew member had to know their job inside and out, because when the wind picked up, there wasn't time for on-the-job training. Sailors scrambled up, swaying rigging in dangerous conditions, adjusting sails while waves crashed over the deck and wind tried to tear them loose. One person making a mistake could doom the entire ship. The weird part is how much teamwork this required from people who were basically professional criminals. Pirates might fight over treasure, but when it came to handling their ship in rough weather, they worked together like a precision machine. The cook, the gunner, the cabin boy, everyone had sailing duties when the wind demanded it. Ships that couldn't handle wind and waves didn't last long in the pirate business. Neither did crews who couldn't work as a team when nature turned violent. Smart pirates learned to read the signs, changing cloud patterns, shifting wave directions, the way seabirds behaved. These clues could mean the difference between smooth sailing and finding yourself in a fight for survival. Yet wind wasn't always the enemy. Understanding different types of sails and how they worked with various wind conditions gave clever pirates major advantages over their targets and enemies alike. While pirates wrestled with the wind's moods, their sails became the key to survival. Most pirate ships relied on square sails, those big rectangular pieces of canvas that hung perpendicular to the ship's body. These square sails worked brilliantly when the wind came from behind, pushing the vessel forward like a helpful giant's hand. But here's where things get interesting. Square sails had a major weakness. They were terrible at catching wind from the side. Try holding a bedsheet straight up in a crosswind and you'll understand the problem. The wind just slides right off, leaving you going nowhere fast. Smart pirates knew this limitation could get them killed, especially when chasing prey or fleeing from Navy warships. That's why many crews also rigged lateen sails on their vessels. These triangular beauties hung at an angle designed to grab wind coming from the side and turn it into forward motion. Lateen sails originated in the Mediterranean, where Arab sailors had perfected the art of sailing against tricky winds for centuries. When pirates encountered these sails, they quickly realized their potential. A lateen sail could help a ship turn faster, maneuver in tight spots, and even make progress when the wind wasn't cooperating. The real magic happened when crews combined both sail types on the same ship. Picture a vessel with square sails on the main masts for power, plus a lateen sail on the front or back for agility. This combination gave pirates options that could mean the difference between capturing a prize and watching it escape. Experienced pirate crews became masters at switching sail configurations based on weather conditions. When strong winds filled their square sails, they'd race across open water like sea wolves. But when the wind shifted or weakened, they'd quickly adjust rigging to deploy their lateen sails for better control. The process required incredible teamwork and timing. Crew members had to scramble up the rigging, untie specific knots, and rearrange heavy canvas, all while the ship pitched and rolled beneath their feet. One wrong move could tear an expensive sailcloth or send a sailor tumbling to the deck below. Then there's the matter of sail maintenance. Pirates couldn't exactly pull into a harbor for repairs when they needed new canvas. They learned to patch tiers with whatever materials they could find, sometimes using clothing from captured merchants or even enemy flags as emergency sail patches. Different combinations of sails also affected how the ship handled in various conditions. A heavily loaded vessel might need more square sail area to maintain speed, while a lightly loaded ship could rely more on lateen sails for quick maneuvering during combat or escape situations. But even the best sail combination meant nothing without skilled hands to operate them. The real test came when pirates needed to coordinate their sailing skills with precise steering. And that's where the ship's helm became absolutely crucial for survival. Getting a pirate ship to go where you wanted it wasn't as simple as turning a steering wheel. The helmsman stood below deck, wrestling with something called a whipstaff, basically a long wooden lever connected to the rudder. This thing was awkward, heavy, and required serious muscle to move. But here's the catch. The helmsman couldn't actually see where the ship was going. That's where the pilot came in. Standing on deck with a clear view of everything, the pilot would shout orders down to the poor guy stuck below. "Hard to starboard," or "ease her to port." The helmsman had to trust these commands completely while fighting against the whipstaff, which seemed determined to wrench his arms off every time a wave hit the rudder. Well, steering was only half the battle. The real magic happened up in the rigging, where crew members scrambled like monkeys whenever the wind shifted. These sailors had nerves of steel, climbing rope ladders 50 feet above a rolling deck while trying not to get knocked into the ocean by a swinging boom. One wrong step meant a very unpleasant meeting with the waves below. The crew used an intricate system of ropes to control the sails. Braces pulled the yards, those horizontal wooden beams holding the sails, from side to side. Lifts raised and lowered them. Sheets controlled the bottom corners of the sails, while halyards hoisted everything up the masts. Each rope had a specific job, and mixing them up could turn a simple maneuver into complete chaos. But why was all this rope work so crucial? Because sails and steering worked together like dance partners. The helmsman could turn the rudder all he wanted, but if the sails weren't trimmed properly, the ship would fight him every inch of the way. Get the sails wrong, and even the strongest sailor couldn't keep the ship on course. Then there's the timing issue. When strong winds hit, everything had to happen fast. The pilot would assess the situation, bark orders to both the helmsman and the crew in the rigging, and everyone had to move at once. Too slow, and the ship might heel over dangerously or get caught with sails flapping uselessly in the wind. Pirates developed their own shorthand for these operations. A simple hand signal or shouted command could trigger a complex series of actions involving dozens of crew members. The weird part is how smooth it all looked when done right, like watching an orchestra where every musician knew their part by heart. Smart captains made sure their crews practiced these maneuvers constantly, because when you're being chased by a warship or trying to catch a fleeing merchant vessel, there's no time for mistakes. But even the most skilled crew faced their biggest challenge when trying to sail against the wind itself. Getting from point A to point B sounds simple enough until you realize the wind isn't cooperating. Pirates couldn't just fire up an engine and power through. When the wind blew directly against their destination, they had to get creative. Enter tacking, the maritime equivalent of zigzagging your way to success. Here's how it worked. Instead of sailing straight into the wind like a stubborn fool, smart pirates would angle their ship about 45 degrees off the wind's direction. They'd sail that angle for a while, then suddenly swing the bow through the wind and sail at the opposite 45-degree angle. Back and forth, like a giant nautical zigzag dance across the ocean. But here's the thing. Tacking wasn't some casual maneuver you could pull off with a skeleton crew. Each tack demanded precise timing and every available hand. The crew had to release certain ropes, haul in others, and shift sails from one side of the ship to the other, all while the ship swung through the wind and waves crashed over the deck. One wrong move and you'd end up dead in the water, sails flapping uselessly. The whole process could take several minutes per tack, and that's if everything went perfectly. Weather conditions made all the difference between smooth sailing and absolute chaos. Light winds meant slow progress and frustrating delays. Strong winds could make the maneuver downright dangerous, with sails threatening to tear and rigging screaming under pressure. Then, there's the matter of distance. What looked like a straight shot to your target could turn into miles of extra sailing. Pirates might spend an entire day tacking against stubborn headwinds just to cover ground they could have sailed in hours with favorable wind. Makes you appreciate why they got so good at reading weather patterns and timing their raids. Smart pirate captains learned to judge when tacking was worth the effort and when it made more sense to find shelter and wait for better conditions. Some storms made tacking impossible entirely. The wind would be too strong, the waves too high, or the risk of losing masts too great. Patience wasn't exactly a pirate virtue, but survival demanded it sometimes. The weird part is how this zigzag strategy actually worked pretty well. Ships with skilled crews could make decent progress even against strong headwinds. It required teamwork, timing, and a captain who knew when to push forward and when to back off. Every pirate crew that mastered tacking gained a huge advantage over those who couldn't handle the complex maneuver. Of course, being able to sail against the wind was just one piece of the puzzle. The real tactical advantage came from understanding wind positioning itself, and how being in the right spot could mean the difference between hunter and hunted. When pirates talk about having the weather gauge, they're describing one of the most powerful advantages at sea. This wasn't some fancy navigation tool or secret weapon. The weather gauge simply meant being upwind of your target. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, this position could make the difference between victory and defeat, between treasure and disaster. Here's why being upwind mattered so much. Pirates holding the weather gauge controlled the entire engagement. They could choose exactly when to attack, when to retreat, and how fast to approach their prey. The wind was literally at their backs, pushing them forward like an invisible hand. Meanwhile, their unfortunate targets downwind had to fight against that same wind to escape or maneuver. But the advantages went beyond just speed and control. Smoke from cannon fire would blow away from the upwind ship and straight into the faces of the downwind crew. Try aiming a cannon when you can't see through thick, choking smoke. Then there's the matter of debris. Splinters from damaged rigging, bits of sail, and even cannonballs would get carried by the wind toward the enemy ship. The pirates upwind stayed relatively clear of this dangerous mess. The weather gauge also meant better visibility. Pirates could see their target clearly while staying partially hidden by their own sails and rigging. Merchant ships downwind often couldn't get a good look at what was bearing down on them until it was too late to mount an effective defense or escape. Then there's the psychological advantage that's often overlooked. Seeing a pirate ship approaching from upwind, with the wind filling their sails and pushing them forward relentlessly, must have been terrifying for merchant crews. There was something inevitable about it, like watching a storm approach. However, holding the weather gauge wasn't always perfect. Ships in the upwind position faced more heel, that dangerous tilting we discussed earlier. Strong winds could push the ship over too far, making it harder to handle and potentially dangerous. Experienced pirate captains had to balance the tactical advantage against the risk of losing control of their own vessel. Smart pirates also knew that the weather gauge could shift. Wind patterns change, especially near coastlines or during storms. A captain might start a battle with the wind advantage only to find himself downwind an hour later. Reading the weather and predicting these changes separated the successful pirates from the ones who ended up at the bottom of the ocean. Getting the weather gauge often required patience and planning. Pirates might shadow a target for hours or even days, waiting for the wind to shift in their favor. Sometimes they'd use the cover of night to position themselves upwind before dawn revealed their presence. But even with perfect positioning, pirates still faced the challenge of actually catching their prey. Having the wind advantage was just the beginning. When the wind started howling and waves grew tall enough to swallow a man whole, pirates had to get creative fast. Their lives depended on it. The same wind that could fill their sails and speed them toward treasure could just as easily flip their ship over like a toy boat in a bathtub. Smart captains knew the first rule of heavy weather. Sometimes less is more. Instead of keeping every sail up to catch maximum wind, they'd actually reduce the sail area. Sounds backwards, right? But here's the thing. Too much sail in a strong gust could heel the ship over so far that water would pour right over the deck. Nobody wants to be swimming with the sharks when there's perfectly good planking underfoot. The technique they used was called reefing. Crew members would climb up the rigging, even in terrible conditions, and literally make the sails smaller by tying off sections of the canvas. Picture trying to fold a bedsheet in a hurricane while balancing on a rope 30 feet above a pitching deck. These guys had nerves of steel and calluses to match. Then there's another clever trick called heaving to. When the seas got really nasty, pirates would turn their ship sideways to the waves and adjust the sails so the vessel would just sit there, bobbing like a cork. The ship would drift slowly but stay relatively stable. It's like hitting the pause button in the middle of nature's tantrum. But wait, there's more ingenuity at work here. Some crews used sea anchors, basically underwater parachutes made of canvas that would drag behind the ship and slow it down. This kept the bow pointed into the waves, which is much safer than getting hit broadside by a wall of water. Weather could change everything about pirate strategy. A captain might spot a fat merchant vessel loaded with gold, but if the seas were churning and the wind was screaming, he'd often hold back. Why? Because losing a mast in battle meant almost certain death. Without proper sail power, a ship became a sitting duck for both enemies and storms. The smart pirates learned to read the signs. Dark clouds building on the horizon meant trouble. The way waves started stacking up told stories about wind direction changes. Even the behavior of seabirds could hint at what weather was coming next. These weren't just sailors, they were weather forecasters with cutlasses. Experienced crews could spot the difference between a passing squall and a full-blown hurricane. One you could ride out with some clever sail work and patience. The other could send you to Davy Jones's locker faster than you could say pieces of 8. Yet even the cleverest weather tricks had limits. Sometimes Mother Nature simply won, and pirates had to find other ways to stay ahead of both storms and enemies. Pirates weren't exactly known for following maritime regulations or respecting property rights. When they spotted a ship with better sailing capabilities, they didn't window shop. They took it. But here's where things get interesting. Stealing wasn't enough. These sea rogues became master shipwrights out of pure necessity. A captured merchant vessel might be perfect for hauling cargo, but terrible for quick escapes. Pirates would immediately start modifying their prizes. They'd rip out heavy cargo holds to reduce weight. Extra sails got added wherever possible, sometimes in configurations that would make traditional sailors shake their heads in disbelief. The goal was simple: be faster than anything chasing you and catch anything you're chasing. Then there's the genius of choosing shallow draft vessels. While naval warships needed deep keels for stability and heavy cannons, pirates preferred boats that could slip into creeks, lagoons, and coastal shallows where bigger ships couldn't follow. Makes sense, right? Why fight a heavily armed warship when you could simply sail somewhere it physically couldn't go? But the real magic happened in how experienced pirates read the world around them. Clouds weren't just weather, they were intelligence reports. A certain type of cloud formation meant wind changes coming in 2 hours. The way waves reflected off distant islands told them which direction storms were moving. Even the behavior of seabirds gave clues about upcoming weather shifts. Smart pirate captains developed an almost supernatural ability to spot wind patterns that others missed. They'd notice how gusts hit the water surface differently, creating darker patches that revealed wind direction changes minutes before they arrived. This advance warning meant they could adjust sails and position their ships for maximum advantage while enemies were still figuring out what was happening. Well, here's something most people don't realize. Pirates often carried spare rigging materials and knew how to jury-rig repairs mid-battle. A torn sail didn't mean defeat. It meant 5 minutes of creative problem-solving with spare canvas and rope. They'd patch, splice, and improvise repairs that kept them moving when conventional crews would have given up. The most successful pirate crews developed their own shorthand communication system for sail handling. Instead of shouting lengthy commands during chaotic moments, they used whistles, hand signals, and prearranged crew movements that let them change sail configurations lightning fast. While merchant crews fumbled with standard procedures, pirates moved like a synchronized machine. And the weird part is, this constant adaptation created some of the most skilled sailors in maritime history. Pirates had to master every aspect of seamanship because their lives literally depended on outmaneuvering both victims and pursuers. They couldn't rely on naval support, friendly ports, or official rescue if things went wrong. Their survival depended entirely on reading wind, weather, and waves better than everyone else, and they absolutely delivered on that challenge.